That's how long I had to hold that hand for. We are back with more Geek Life right here live on Twitch. Before we go further, I did forget to mention that we are sponsored. We're sponsored by Swift Lifestyles. Use code GetGeeked at swiftlifestyles.com for 15% off your purchase of energy drinks, hydration powders, shakers, all kinds of swag, all kinds of cool stuff. Swift Lifestyles are pretty much like your average G Fuel, except they're trying to be a little bit healthier, and you can get discounts on them from us. So go check them out.
They make you breathe underwater.
Yeah, they can make you breathe underwater. They will make you guaranteed happier. It will cure depression, and I've heard it also cures cancer too.
And erectile dysfunction.
And erectile dysfunction all in one.
Fun fact.
Don't quote us on that though. I would check out their website for more information.
In the same way that all of Alex Jones supplements work.
Exactly. Yes. In that way. We're good on that way. We're covered now.
I didn't know he had supplements.
As legal, we're clear. We're good.
That's how he gets all his funding, man. That's just all supplements. Anyways. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about retcons and revisions. It's a tale as old as time. Author writes a story, fan falls in love with the story. Several years later, author releases new information that completely changes how the fans understand the story. All that good stuff. And we're going to be talking about it tonight on our deep dive. So, Cape, do the dandy.
Time to dive deep.
And there we are. Yeah, that was really smooth. Very, very smooth. So a retcon is short for retroactive continuity, and it is when the form or content of a previously established narrative has changed. Retcons are used by authors to increase their creative freedom on the assumption that the changes are unimportant to the audience compared to the new story which can be told. Retcons are commonplace in pulp fiction and especially in comic books published by long-established publishers such as DC and Marvel. The long history of popular titles and number of writers who contribute to the story often create situations that demand clarification or revisions. Retcons also often appear in manga, soap operas, serial dramas, movie sequels, cartoons, professional wrestling angles, video games, video series, and other forms of serial fiction. Tonight, we're kicking off our deep dive conversation on retcons and revision by asking, what is a retcon? We kind of talked about that a little bit earlier, but yeah, Jake, how would you define a retcon?
I mean, you pretty much defined it a little bit earlier. It's just whenever, they go back and change something, or maybe don't even change anything, just kind of like, the story heads into a different direction, a branch timeline, if you will. Yeah. So that's kind of how I think of them. But even in that aspect, we get edits to branch timelines sometimes. So
yeah. And there's like there's various motivations for retconning. Right, you can to accommodate, sequels or derivative works that would otherwise be ruled out in response to negative fan receptions on previous stories, to correct and overcome errors or problems identified in prior work since its publication, change how prior work should be interpreted, or to match reality or projections of the future that are later proven wrong. All those things. There's tons and tons and tons of reasons to retcon. Yes. But Kev, in your opinion, what is a good reason to retcon?
When your big golden goose is hatched, your golden egg is hatched into a golden goose, and now you need a new golden goose, i.e. Loki, and the retconning of the MCU, essentially.
Yeah, with the whole Loki series.
Yeah.
Jake, what about you? What are good reasons to retcon?
One of my personal, I think the biggest reason that a lot of places do it is to kind of like either reboot a franchise or restart something or get a fresh start somewhere. And so I really think that's kind of some of the only times that it's excusable, as if you're going to do something new or you're going to create more to a story of a character. I kind of just hate it for the sake of doing it, just because like you want to like maybe, I don't know, like just I just hate whenever they do it just to do it and it doesn't actually end up being like kind of how Disney was like, oh, all this stuff's just no longer canon or does something like that. And it's just like, man, just you could leave it. You
Yeah,
could just
right.
leave it. It's been getting built up
Right.
for years, you know, like you don't
Right.
really have to do that.
Right. Yeah.
But I do think there are some good reasons, and one of them is if you're going to use it as a launch pad to kind of like do something, you know, like new with it, right? And I know like one of the next kind of things that we're getting into is like what is the best retcon, and I think that's kind of like a good segue there because one of the best ones ever, in my opinion, was like when Deadpool, right? We wouldn't have Ryan Reynolds' awesome Deadpool movies if they didn't somehow retcon that X-Men Origins Wolverine origin of
Right.
Deadpool. And so like I'm glad they retconned that. That was a great reason too, because they took the
Yeah.
mouth off the merc with the mouth.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Real.
like I'm glad that, you know, the Marvel franchise took a hard look at that, said, yeah, I don't know what the fuck Sony's doing over there. And
Yeah.
decided that they were going to just redo Deadpool, go with, you know, and I'm glad we stayed with Ryan Reynolds though.
Yeah.
But, you know, that
Yeah.
whole switch over was like, you know, so that I think that's a good reason to retcon is
Right.
whenever you're
Right.
going to relaunch a franchise similar to Deadpool.
For me, a good reason to retcon is it makes the story better. If it makes the story better, if it improves the story in any way, shape, or form, makes it, you know, as some people are talking about in the thing, less racist or problematic characters, that's absolutely a good reason to retcon.
Yeah.
But also, if the storyline was just garbage, you know, I think we're going to talk about some of our examples of some of the best retcons, and I think that there's plenty of them that just went back and said, "Hey, this storyline was trash." So yeah, we
Right.
retconned it. You
Yeah.
know,
Right.
and I think that that's valid enough reason to do so. In fact, let's go
Right.
ahead and move on right into that. Jake, in your opinion, what is the best retcon?
I mean, I think, like I said, I think the Deadpool one was pretty much, you know, a great retcon. I think going back, changing, you know, that to where like they could have a better origin story or at least better future stories for, you know, Deadpool. That was huge. Um, I don't know, man. I mean, because there's so many really great. I think Terminator Genesis changing everything in that one was really good.
Mm, yeah,
It was a movie, you know, like that was kind of stupid, but
yeah,
the Terminator Genesis decided to retcon the entire Terminator franchise by setting up an alternative timeline where an Arnie Terminator is sent back to protect a young Sarah Connor as a child. So
yeah,
it's pretty much like she's a total badass by the time Carl Reese, you know, shows up. But anyway, it's funny how they retconned Genesis's retconning with Terminator 6 and told us
Right.
to ignore 3, 4, and 5. And
yeah,
so like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
like so Terminator 6, I think that one was a good retcon because I don't think Genesis was very smart. So I think that's just examples of good ones is whenever they go back and fix what shitty sequels or something like that kind of did, you know.
yeah. No, I think that that's a good one. For me, one of the best retcons. Actually, Kev, what's into your best retcons before I get into this?
One of my best. I like Days of Futures Past. I really like that
Yeah,
movie. I know that's some people that's like, you know, or I feel like that movie gets a unnecessary amount of polarization, but I thought if we're just talking in vacuums with great movies, and to me that also did a pretty good job retconning, I'd say yeah, Days of Futures Past.
yeah. No,
Yep.
that's was my that was gonna be my pick for
Mm,
the best retcon. I think that the X-Men franchise and kind of going back through and taking out X1 and X2,
yeah,
I think was brilliant.
yeah,
Especially with all the problems that they had there. And I think the ways that they have woven it into the other things like Deadpool and things like that, I think have been really, really well. So the continuity there, I think, is you know, pretty exciting. Um, but anyways, that would hands down be one of my favorite retcons out there. What do you think is the worst retcon, Kev?
Worst retcon, boy. I know there's so many. I know there's a few in anime that just don't make any sense. Uh, I don't know. I'm trying to think because most of the things, usually the best retcons were because of the worst scenarios. So I'm trying to think if there's one. I think I just usually forget those. I burn them from memory, or maybe they've already been retconned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jake, what about you? What is the worst retcon in your opinion?
I mean, so one that was never addressed anyway has to be the fact that Luke and Leia make out.
Yeah.
And so I don't know necessarily if it would be the worst retcon or the best retcon. Like I've been trying to think of like where to put that one because I think it's like
Right.
it was never really addressed. And so like, they make out and then they have that infamous kiss in The Empire Strikes Back. And it was like George Lucas didn't know that he was going to have so much success there that he was going to continue the franchise. And I think that's been the whole like backstory there is that like, they kind of like thought it was good in the moment, didn't know how many extra movies they were going to get and everything. And so, but then in the next one, in Return of the Jedi, we find out that they're twins. And that was a pretty passionate kiss in the movie before. And even Harrison Ford kind of gives them a weird look in the movie, and so like it's just one of those things where like I don't know if that's the best retcon or the worst retcon, but it's one of those that like they never really addressed it and they just left it there. And so now it's just kind of like, oh man, so like I don't know. Luke and Leia have a weird Tom Brady and Tom Brady's children relationship, I guess. Yeah, thanks, Kev. I'm glad you got that one. Yeah, that's Tom Brady. Sorry, I know he's a Tampa now. My bad.
We're gonna keep picking on Star Wars. I'm gonna say Darth Plagueis. I don't know if that necessarily constitutes as a complete retcon but I feel like they've retconned themselves without retconning.
I think it's close enough. I think it counts.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole Palpatine storyline is a pretty bad retcon too. Like,
yeah, that's true.
That was like, oh, he died. No, he had a clone. Like, I don't know. I just don't know how I feel about that one. But is that the worst retcon?
Okay. All right. All the Fast and Furious.
All the Fast and Furious. Yeah.
The retcons don't make any sense. Like Han blew up in a car, and then he's like, "Nah, I'm back."
No, I didn't blow up in a car.
You thought you saw that. Literally, that was their answer. They was like, "But we saw your car blow up," and he goes, "Mister, Nobody has a way about making things look like someone has died." I was like, what? Didn't explain anything.
We didn't address the probably most controversial retcon of all time, which is midichlorians or midichlorians or whatever the fuck George Lucas decided to go with. Midichlorians. So up until the Phantom Menace, Star Wars fans were content just knowing that the Force bound the universe together, and some people could tap into it and gain superpowers and become space wizards. It just works, all right, But then in Episode 1, they try to reveal that some people can have a certain amount of the Force, and it really depends entirely on how many midichlorians are present in your cells. And so like they tried to like make almost like a scientific reason for Jedi, and I just don't. I think there's a reason why it's probably one of the most hated retcons, because people say why. Like it's like I was saying at the beginning. I don't mind it when it adds to the story, when it's something that's going to be a launch pad for news stories or anything like that. This was simply like it was a fucking nothing burger. Like it doesn't really add anything in my opinion. Like, And so anyway, and I don't even know if I've heard them referenced in any of the Disney Star Wars movies. Have you heard? When's the last time you heard about midichlorians?
Never.
I mean, no,
they didn't exist.
In The Mandalorian. In The Mandalorian.
Did they mention in The Mandalorian?
Oh, they did.
They mentioned in The Mandalorian. One of the reasons why they're seeking out Grogu is so they can make clones for Palpatine, because the Grogu has a super high M count for his age.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Okay, so they're still putting their toes in it. You know what I mean? But it's almost like it didn't go as hard as I mean, we got about a 30-minute explanation of what the fuck they were in the Phantom Menace.
What about Dragon Ball Super as a retcon? Does that count?
Dragon Ball Super. Oh yeah, I guess it does.
I think that's a pretty bad one.
Changes the story.
Yeah, kind of. Some things are weird. There's a lot of things that don't make sense. I know there's people that love it.
Another one, Independence Day Resurgence. Apparently, the aliens just blew up the world for fun. I thought that one was pretty crazy.
That was terrible. That was awful.
Like they, Resurgence could have fixed this issue by ditching the molten core for fuel bit and just had new massive ships there, to avenge all of the aliens we killed last time by destroying the planet. So I mean, that one was another crazy one.
Ooh.
There's been some bad retcons.
There's been some really
Jurassic Park, The Lost World. No, not The Lost World. What was the second Jurassic World movie? Whatever that one was. That was a pretty bad retcon.
What did they retcon in that one? I thought I watched that one recently. I thought that was a continuation. That they got the park got out of control, and they had to figure out what to do with the island. Where did the retcon there?
Weren't they like in the John Hammond's mansion or something? And he had like a bunch of dinosaurs.
They were there because I remember I literally just watched this recently. They were there because they shipped the dinosaurs there, and there was a bunch of rich people that were going to bid on them there, and then they got out because they haven't learned their fucking lesson from any time they transport dinosaurs.
Amazing Spider-Man 3 also tried to make Uncle Ben's killer the Sandman.
That was
that retcon that was I'm glad we got the Marvel multiverse, so that now we know that only happened in one universe and it was the bad one.
What about Jumanji? Jumanji was a pretty good retcon. Does that count as a retcon?
Is it a good retcon? I mean,
no, I don't think it's a retcon.
Well, it's a revision, and I think it still counts in this conversation, right? Because they changed it from a board game to a video game kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just to modernize it in a way,
right?
Yeah. So we agree that Star Wars has the worst retcons. Okay.
I think Star Wars has the worst retcons for sure. Yeah. And still of all of that, they haven't gone back and fucking fixed Jar Jar Binks, really. Like they're gonna go back and revise everything, but they're not gonna fucking revise Jar Jar Binks.
Nothing to fix,
or at least make him a Sith.
You don't fix perfection.
Yeah, you don't fix perfection.
He is a Sith. They're playing the long game. Just
it's the long game. Yeah, I can't wait until they come out with it's just called Binks.
Episode.
It's gonna be a Disney Plus series called Binks.
Binks. Darth Binks.
The
Legend of Darth Binks.
That would be pretty good.
Gonna fuck you up.
I'd watch that.
Yeah.
So does retconning or revising a story strengthen or hurt a story? Jake, we'll start with you.
I mean, obviously, in some aspects, it helps it, and some it hurts. Like I think we've seen some where I think, in a way, I want to say retconning like Luke and Leia be a brother and sister ended up helping the franchise, right? Because then we get the iconic relationship between Leia and Hans,
Right.
And so I think sometimes it can help it, and I think sometimes it can hurt it. I can't really think of too many examples of it hurting it right off the top of my head because I've just been talking about all the good ones. Right. And so but yeah, no, I think it can definitely strengthen the story in some aspects, but then can also hurt it. So it's a little bit of both. Not the most decisive answer, but I'm a kind of a middle of the ground guy. So
you don't deal in absolutes. You would
Sith deal in absolutes. You know what I mean? This shit's 50-50 here.
Yeah.
So you're saying you're not a Sith? You're saying you're Jedi scum?
I mean,
he's saying he's not a Sith. He's just
not a Sith.
He's not a Jedi.
He's walking in the middle then.
He's
all right,
the gray.
centrist.
The gray Jedi.
What about you, Kev? What do you think? Does retconning or revising hurt the story or strengthen it?
I think it depends. Kind of like what Jake was saying. Like I think sometimes you just gotta like end it, nip it in the bud, say the story's over. I think that's when the retcon starts hurting it. We're like, how can we milk this? How can we revive this? How can we bring this back into the zeitgeist? And I think that's when and sometimes it'll be they'll have to retcon it because the story actually ended. Like there's nothing else to do.
Yeah.
Like there's no antagonist big enough. There's no challenge big enough or worthy enough. So now they're like, okay, well, how can we just do it again somehow, but make it different?
Right.
I think that's what retcon hurts. But I think it's better when, for one, if it's like like changing a character for some controversy or like McCree. I mean, I'm not sure if that's a complete retcon. That's more of just them changing the name. Like
no, I think that still counts in the conversation we're having right here. That is a retcon. That's a revision for 100%.
I think that's a good one. So stuff like that. I think, or if it's like a main staple in like comic book, like Deadpool or Venom or Spider-Man, if they just or Hulk, those movies. Like the first Hulk movie was trash, and then the Tim Norton one was really good, and we all know how great Deadpool is now. So I think that's when it's good.
I think that it's a lot like kind of like when the Flash goes back in time in the comics, right? He's always like, "Oh, it's on this one time, right?" And then when he goes back and he fucks up with too much shit, then everything gets fucked up. And I think that
Yeah.
it's a lot like that. When you look at some of like the only thing that really hurts the Spider-Man home series is the fact that it's the third Spider-Man reboot within a span of like at least 10, 20 years. You know, like what
Not just a Spider-Man reboot, but a reboot within a reboot within a reboot.
yeah,
Like,
I mean, like, and so like that at that point, I remember seeing people that are like, "Oh, I don't want to even keep up with Spider-Man because there's so many of these different ones that I have to deal with,
yeah.
or I don't want to even get caught up on." It's like, no, you don't have to get caught up with that. It's a revision or it's a retcon, whatever the case may be. You know, I think that there is a chance where you can actually start harming it, but for the most part, if it's a good retcon, then it's something that is strengthening the story. So I do think
Yeah.
it can absolutely strengthen the story.
Yeah.
Do you guys think it's a fair tool for a writer to use, or should writers be forced to stick with continuity? Jake, what do you think?
Oh, I mean, I think it's a fair tool because I mean, when you really look at it, like, dude, we want to be stuck with that shitty Deadpool, right?
Yeah.
Did we want to be stuck with things like? And dude, I hate to keep picking on Ryan Reynolds, but
Yeah.
like if when DC does choose to do a new Green Lantern movie, which they should,
Yeah.
they should.
Will.
Should they be stuck with that shit? No.
No.
They should be able to pretend like that never fucking happened and just go move on.
Yeah.
Like kind of like how the Suicide Squad did in a way. Like I mean they did make nods to the first one, right? Like and everything, but they were kind of like, the Suicide Squad now. This is who we got, right? And so like I'm just saying like I think like I'm pretty when DC does want to make another Green Lantern movie, I'm happy that the writers don't have to stick with that continuity, right? So I think it's a good tool. I think it's a fair tool when used correctly,
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. Why, Kevin, why do you believe fans get upset over retcons?
I think it happens with when it changes, I guess. I don't even think it has a lot to do. I think continuity is a big factor, but I think it's more so in like, just what made that show or movie special, right? Like Star Wars added midichlorians or whatever. I think if it does stuff like that where it just kind of changes the narrative in a way and really just reshapes the entire universe of that whatever it is that you were accustomed to, I think that's when it's kind of a issue with the fans.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jake, what do you feel about that?
Oh, change is scary. I mean, I think that's one of the things that makes a lot of fans upset is whenever it's all about the amount of beloved the franchise is, right? Like the higher the amount of clout a franchise has, the more fans are less like kind of open to remakes or revisions. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so it's kind of like if they did some retcons and changed some stuff up in this new like Ghostbusters movie, yeah, fans are gonna be pissed about it, like because this is the first one that instead of just having like a all female cast and it be at 100% reboot, this one's a continuation of the older films. It's supposed to be like a true sequel in a way, and so it's like well, if they go back and change some shit from movies that are known and loved generations ago, like it's gonna make fans upset. Change, people don't like change. Change is scary. That's why I think a lot of fans get upset over it. And I think it's also, like I said, it depends on how beloved the franchise is. I think the reason why people got so upset over midichlorians is because since the fucking 70s, they had just been like, oh yeah, it's the Force. It's strong. It's strong with that person. It's weak with that person. It's the Force.
Yeah.
And then like fucking 20, 30 years later, they're like, actually, it's midichlorians. And then like, and everybody's just like, oh, fuck you. Like, like I didn't need that. I didn't need an explanation.
It's always bad when they try to explain things that wouldn't be able to explain in real life. Like, I think that's the problem. They're like, let's try and see if we can make this scientific as possible. It's like, no, you can't.
I definitely, again, I like the idea of the Force being something that's more metaphysical and not something that's so biologically controlled. And I think that's what a lot of people had problems with stuff like that about.
Well, because like to me, I even feel like, I mean, I'm not like super spiritual, but I feel like everybody's got vibes. You can feel a vibe on somebody, and so that's how the Force was to me. It like kind of like, while there's no like scientific measurement, they can't hook me up to a machine and be like, okay, here's Jake's aura. You know what I mean?
Right.
But like, but you can kind of feel that shit about people. You can be like, that dude's sketchy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you can feel that. And so like that's what I pictured meeting Yoda, and like even though him being like this weird alien creature being like, dude, you're pretty dope. Like I get good vibes from this guy. His language is cool. He's talking backwards and shit. Yeah. I like this guy.
Yeah.
All right. So to kind of encapsulate this whole deep dive, I guess, in your own words, when do you retcon? When do you not? Kev, we'll start with you.
I think you retcon when you've clearly fucked up the universe.
When you've clearly fucked up the universe, and when do you not?
Days of Future Past is when you need to retcon, right? I think, and the first Deadpool.
Yeah.
You don't retcon when something is completed, or or if everyone was fine with it and like the way things were, how things operated, right? Like the life force of the movie or show or the characters. I think that's when
Jake, what about you? To
I agree.
encapsulate it simply. Yeah.
I mean, like it's one of those like to piggyback off Kev. I think like it's good to do a retcon whenever when you need to hit a restart.
Yeah.
When something's finished, like kind of like I mean, just please everybody in chat, don't freak out because they're not doing this because they never will. Hopefully, and if they do, I hope I don't live to see it. But say they retconned like Back to the Future. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, or some other kind of like beloved franchise that's done. Like, we know there's not going to be another Back to the Future movie unless they completely reboot the franchise because Doc's too old. Michael J. Fox having his old thing. Like I believe he has Parkinson's, right? Yeah, and so it's like, the OG cast just can't do it physically.
No,
and so we're never going to get another one that's an actual full-blooded continuation into that franchise. So the only thing they would ever do is some kind of weird prequel or something, maybe, right? Or something completely new with new characters, a complete character reboot. And if they retconned anything in that movie, people would already be pissed off they were doing a new Back to the Future movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, like, if they retconned anything in it, even more so. So if it's a beloved franchise, and it's done, just leave it alone. We don't need anyone retconning Lord of the Rings. We don't need any more retconning Star Wars, if I'm being honest. Like, I mean, like just take the stories that were made and continue them, or do something like that.
Right.
Like,
there's so much to build in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah. Can we retcon Game of Thrones?
Can we? Yes. Things that deserve to be retconned. Fucking Game of Thrones. Let's go.
Yes.
Like
Game of Thrones retconned itself before it even finished. That's the funny part.
Can we get a what if and just have a what if season 7 of Game of Thrones didn't happen?
Oh my god, dude! Yeah, I swear it'll go down in history.
Thanos is like, I don't need to destroy the universe now. Like,
if I had all the Infinity Stones, the first thing I'm doing is like that last season.
All right, guys. Before we get started, first things first. I've got all the Infinity Stones. Season 7 of Game of Thrones is actually a banger now.
Yeah.
Straight banger.
Yeah.
All right. So for me, I think that I said it earlier. You retcon when you need to make the story better in any way, shape, or form, and you don't retcon when it's frivolous or excessive.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing, the time when retcons are the worst is when it seems like the writer just didn't like where the other writer was going, and so they want to do their own story, and that kind of thing, that attitude usually doesn't bode well to other stories and just makes it disjointed. Yeah. Or if you just don't go back and do the work, like one of the big things I think about when I think of retcons or continuity errors is I think of Pokemon. You think of Ash constantly references the 50 Tauros that he has, right? But that is from a Safari Zone episode that was banned in the United States, right? Because they had the gun that they were pointing at somebody's face. That episode though is referenced heavily throughout the whole thing, but there's no record of that in there, and so they don't go anywhere to address it or anything else to do it. They just move past it. I think that's just lazy, So when it's frivolous or when I guess in the Pokemon circumstance, when it's frivolous or when it is necessary to the storyline. I mean, I think that bodes when to retcon, and is what my first.
Yeah,
phrase, so.
I agree. I think Pokemon should be retcon. None of it makes sense.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they kind of do every season though. They kind of retcon themselves and then start from the beginning for the most part, except for these last couple of seasons.
But I'm 15 and I catch literal gods in a Pokeball.
Right, right. And then he'll be like, go see a legendary Pokemon that he's like had a movie with, right? And he's like, oh, who is that? And it's like, Lugia, you fucking bonded. You had a whole
Right.
movie
There's a
with
whole
this
thing. There's a whole movie.
There was a whole, like,
like
you cried and everything.
you touched heads with it,
right?
and
You sang a song and or
There are
played the flute.
senators quoting phrases from that movie now because it's been out so long. How do you not remember this? You know,
Isn't he still 10?
he's still 10 in some ways, shape, or form.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I think
the real
Stranger
question
Things
is, how
might have
long
to
has
end up
Mr. Mime
retconning.
been with his mom? Because there's something weird going on there. Anyways, that'll about do it for our deep dive.
big hands.
Yeah, listen.
He's got big hands. You know what they say.
That will do it for our deep dive this week. But don't worry, we've got a top Zen coming for you guys. Doodle, why don't you go ahead and run that dandy for us?